Hello, everyone. My name is Adnan Julani. I am a researcher with the Palestinian Academic Society for International Affairs, PASSIA. We would like to welcome you today for this meeting on the state of affairs of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, and what options lie ahead for the PLO with regards to the possibility of reform, additions, and everything. Let me start by giving the floor to Dr. Mahdi Abdelhadi, the chairman of PASSIA, who will give you some opening remarks and thoughts on the topic.
Thank you, Adnan. Thank you very much for everybody for attending and participating in this meeting. This is one of the usual ongoing roundtable meeting at PASSIA. Recently, we have been focusing on the Zoom.
There's an echo, Dr. Mahdi. There's an echo.
There is an echo, yeah. The echo is over now? The echo is over, Rahul echo?
Yes.
Yes, we're okay. Maybe because we have two computers in the same room. Yes, you are right. So he moved to the other office, no problem. Give him 1 second to relax. Thank you, Adnan, again. The idea of this roundtable meeting is to bring members of the Palestinian society in Jerusalem and the rest of the occupied territories with professionals and diplomats and the concerned people to share together their thoughts and their ideas on certain issues related to ongoing Palestinian national resistance to end occupation and to breathe freedom and independence. Recently, we have been witnessing the rise of the national pride among the youth of Palestine, who represent 60% of our society. And we're eager and interested in reflecting their position on maintaining their presence in the old city of Jerusalem. They succeeded in resisting the occupier policies and practices, which we witnessed for the first time, the rise of the right wing to be embodied in the security apparatus in Israel. And with their atrocities and their attacks on the Palestinians, they face a resistance by the youth to maintain their presence and their breathing in the city, especially the Damascus Gate, Sheikh Jarrah, the Old City, and the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, as well as the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This was reflected in the rise of the Palestinian national pride all over Palestine or occupied Palestine and the region, and later on reflected in what happened 11 days of war on Gaza al-Izza, who resisted and maintained their steadfastness and passed a clear message that they are not going to surrender, they are not going to give in. And after 11 days of the war on Gaza, Palestinians breathe recognition by the world of their need to end occupation. And along this environment, whether I like it or not, many issues were related to the Palestinian national movement, in particular what they have been working on for the last 2 or 3 decades, for reconciliation, for election, for the revisal of the PLO, and for maintaining a new political agenda for the national movement of Palestine. Things work smoothly on that direction with meeting with President Abbas, all the faction, and came with this consensus for the 3 things, basically 3 things, which are election, revisal of the PLO, as well as a political national agenda for a new chapter of Palestine. This consensus and agreement did not work in later stages, especially after the war in Gaza, and after the Egyptians tried their utmost support and help to bring reconciliation in Cairo meetings. But the agenda continued to be very clear. The first statement came from Gaza, Abu Sanwar, in a press conference, a clear message saying Hamas is not a terrorist organization. Hamas is a resistance movement. Hamas is part of the Palestinian house. And they wanted to have recognition and to be part of the house. And in order to be part of the house, they want to enter the PLO. The PLO has been our national pride, our consensus as well as the embodiment of the Palestinian national aspiration. The PLO was born on the lap of the Arab world in Alexandria Conference 1964, recognized by all the Arab states in 1974 in Ramallah Summit, and later on by the whole world. On the other face of the coin, Fatah and other factions are already in the PLO, and they are opening their doors and windows and arms to receive Hamas, Jihad Islami, and other factions to be part of the house. And in order to be part of the house and recognize and revise the PLO, they need to have reconciliation and they need to have election, which both elements did not work. No reconciliation is on the table implemented, no election as promised, as planned to be held. The question now, what PLO we are looking for in such a political national environment? The question is, of course, for our lovely speaker to present his views, his analysis, his ideas, representing the pulse of the society, telling the world, telling us, first of all, what are the plans for ahead, whether we are talking about reconciliation, whether we are talking about election, which are the two items are not implemented in the current situation. And of course, how to revise and reconstitute the PLO, which is the Palestinian National Council, the Central Council, the Executive Committee, and how to do maybe the election for these bodies or a consensus among faction and other intended to have members in the House. The whole world is witnessing and following up our address, which is the PLO, which has been recognized by Israel, recognized by the world, and have Palestine as observer state in the United Nations, and have the Palestinian flag at the UN. Along these lines, we are here to discuss and to share together the reflections, the ideas, the position of different members, different components of the agenda, and to understand what PLO we are looking for. Since 1974 has been recognized. And by the way, which we have been putting on the table, no attempt succeeded under any conditions, under any circumstances for the last several decades to have alternative leadership or substitute PLO for the Palestinians. The consensus is the same PLO headed by President Abbas with the Executive Committee members and others. In this environment, we are all invited to share a discussion. I will move to give the floor for Hannes to share with us, as Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, partner of PASSIA for the last 30 years, our concern, our interest in sharing and developing ideas and coming with position for the Palestinian society as well as for the people. Hannes, of course, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Mahdi. Let me say first, your voice is going up and down, as if you're very far in the distance and then coming back close up. Maybe you want to solve that technical issue for the rest of the conversation. But from what I heard from you, I don't want to take too much of our time because we want to have as much time as possible with our guest speaker and panelist, Salem Barahmeh today, who not only is a friend, but also a very smart observer, I think, of especially what the young academic youth in Palestine thinks and what it aspires to. And I believe we should really enlarge the discussion to the subject of democratic representation of the Palestinian people. This is what it's all about. And I mean, we've seen the announcement of election, not only for the PLC, but also for presidential elections and then the PNC elections. And we have seen that process fail. But even before we had the elections, and I believe there was some enthusiasm in the end for the elections, otherwise we wouldn't have seen such a high number of people registering for elections, and we wouldn't have seen 36 lists register for the elections, despite all the difficulties that were put in place in order to come up with a list and being registered for that. However, there was criticism from the get-go that the order was wrong. There shouldn't be elections for the PLC first, then the presidential elections, then the PNC. But it should be the other way around, because the PLO, being the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, of all Palestinian people, it should be the first institution that should re-engage in a more democratic setup. I remember that also with Salem, we had these kinds of conversations, and I'm very eager to hear what he has to say today. Obviously, on this very sad day, where we're seeing the consequences of a more and more authoritarian PA really reacting in a very harsh way to any criticism. I think this is very worrying trends. It's a very sad day, and I'm very thankful that Salem, despite the current events, took the time to talk to us today. Thank you very much.
Adnan, the floor is yours. We cannot hear you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahdi. Thank you very much, Hannes, for these opening remarks, which set the stage for the main speaker of today, Mr. Salem Barahmeh, who is the Executive Director of the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy in Ramallah. He is one of the youth activists, those working towards more inclusive youth involvement in Palestinian society as well as in Palestinian politics. I will leave it for Salem to introduce himself in the best way possible and to give us his thoughts and ideas about the topic of today. Salem, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you to PASSIA and to FES for having me. I join you today with a heavy heart, a very heavy heart. I think we lost an incredible voice in our society that was fighting for fighting corruption, fighting for democracy, for inclusion. And I think his death is a very glaring symptom of a very deep disease within our political system that is at the heart of what we're discussing today. And so, you know, I hope Nizar Banat finds justice, the justice he deserves. I join you today also wearing two hats. So I'm the director of PIPD, but also a member of Jil Tajdid al-Demokrati, which is a movement of young people that started recently in the last few months working on the transformation of the Palestinian political system into one that is democratic and representative. I want to start with the PLO and the history of the PLO, and then maybe bring us to today. And I think some of the critical conversations happening amongst youth, because we need to recognize that the younger generation represents the majority of society. We're a young population. The average age in Palestine is 21, yet the average age of the leadership of the PLO is 70. So there's a huge gap. And so we need to address that and be realistic in where the majority of the society is. I think the PLO in our history offered a political system, a unifying body in a time of our fragmentation, in a time where we're refugees, and allowed to bring together different factions in its iterations, especially after 1967, when it was led and taken over by the different groups that lead it still today, Fatah, PFLP, DFLP, etc. And the system within the PLO itself was one based on quota. It was a quota system within the PNC that allowed for a national liberation movement still very much involved in armed resistance to effectively take decisions and maneuver and engage the world. And through that time, starting in '74 with its new 10-point program, there was an evolution of the PLO beyond that, which eventually led us to 1988 and the acceptance of essentially the two-state solution. I think in the 70s, that was the heyday of the PLO as a political system, as a body that brought everyone together, because I think fundamentally people believed in its purpose of liberation. I think as it started to move beyond that, it started to lose a bit of its appeal, especially after Lebanon, when it lost relevance and it had to ride the wave of the first intifada that was taking place in Palestine to regain its popularity on some level. But the PLO has always been an instrument of the times and those who lead it. I mean, the PNC was dramatically inflated with numbers to be able to pass through a decision on Oslo, essentially. And so in its essence, it was never a democratic institution. And I think for that point of our history, it was fine. It was an organization that was within the context of decolonization and national liberation struggles around the world, from the ANC, to the national liberation movement in Vietnam, etc. I think where we are today is a product of this trend, these processes that was very much accelerated by the Oslo paradigm. And there's been a complete hollowing out for the PLO and everything it used to be. All the power has now, all the locus of power has moved entirely to the PA and to Fatah, to the dominant faction of the PA. And it's been built on a very intricate patronage system that extends into every part of our lives, obviously, plus heavy control from the security services, which we saw the consequences of last night. And the PLO has, in a sense, no longer held that position within our society, which brought people together, which was a means for national consensus decision-making. And that's fundamentally the problem. As we look at the last 30 years, and without romantically thinking about the project itself, we need to assess it based on the merits. Did it work? Did it not work? And if we look at it, we're nowhere closer to the two-state solution. That national project failed. We are now further down the spectrum of Greater Israel with colonization, Bantustans. We look like an archipelago, and as this paradigm ends and we look to the future, there needs to be a vehicle, there needs to be a political system, whether it's the PLO or otherwise, that is able to bring Palestinians together. Oslo reinforced the fragmentation we saw that has been imposed on us by Israel. And in this asymmetry of power between us and our occupier, when we look at the system of apartheid, our power at the end of the day is the 13 million Palestinians all around the world. And if we are not able to mobilize them, if we are not able to bring them together in one political system, to speak with one voice, pursue the same strategy and the same vision, that is a fundamental national strategic failure. And without that political system, the national movement will continue to be on its deathbed. So that's the importance of the PLO. Now, the fight was long and tough to have the PLO become the legitimate and sole representative of the Palestinian people. If you look at the UN resolution that made us a non-observer member state, the provisional government of the state of Palestine is not the PA, it's the PLO. So it still has that legal recognition all around the world. Every embassy essentially should be belonging to the PLO, not the foreign ministry of the PA. But again, this reflects the complete hollowing out of that institution and one that is invested very heavily into it. Now, if you go to many Palestinians that are politicized and ask them, what is your political framework? It will always be the PLO, not the PA, if those are the two choices that are offered. But I want to come now, I think, to the younger generation and Palestinians who essentially came to consciousness in the Oslo era. To many of them, you ask them about the PLO, they don't know. I don't know what that is. I don't know who's in the executive committee. I don't know who's in the PNC. It's a completely detached institution. And as you see Palestinians lead the confrontation and the resistance to Israeli apartheid and settler colonialism across Palestine, it was led by this younger generation. The majority of Palestinian society is under 30. And the majority of young Palestinian society, so 67% of young Palestinians do not belong to a Palestinian faction. Fatah, PFLP, etc. The majority of young Palestinians are actually depoliticized in that sense. They are not engaged in politics. I am 32 years old. I've never had a chance to vote. And this is fundamentally part of the problem. We do not believe in any form of participation that can essentially shape our lives, because we've been marginalized and disenfranchised at minimum for the last 15 years. But then we also remind people that actually the PNC was never directly elected in its lifetime. You know, it was decisions by quota. So this is where we are here today. You have a younger generation that is leading the way in terms of resisting and confrontation, but is not represented and is not within the political making or decision-making system. The question we ask ourselves is the idea to revive the PLO or not? And this is, I'm going to give you a summary of the conversation, not my personal opinion. I'll get to my personal opinion in a bit. There are many Palestinians, the majority of which are not only in Palestine, but in the diaspora, that do not believe that the PLO is worth saving. The current entities that are fighting over the PLO are factions that don't represent Palestinians. The majority, if you exclude Fatah from the PLO, a lot of the parties that currently exist there do not have membership over a couple hundred or a couple thousand. You know, these are the parties that were going to run on Fatah's official list because they can't compete on their own, and if they were to compete in elections, they wouldn't even reach any form of percent. So this is part of the conversation, and it's sad to say, because there's a complete lack of understanding of our history, but I understand where a lot of these young Palestinians come from. So you look at the PLO and we look at what's needed to make it this political system it once was. It needs to start with complete reform of the PNC. The PNC cannot remain a quota system anymore. It needs to be a directly proportionally elected body that gives every Palestinian all around the world a voice. We live in a digital age. Elections can be done through technology. A few years ago, there was a professor in Oxford called Karma Nabulsi, with a team that started a registration process with the approval of the PA and the elections commissions in Palestine of every Palestinian in the world. So we reach a point where we can have these elections around the globe. But after a while, there was a political decision from the foreign ministry and the president to not engage. But actually registration had started in Syria during the Syrian war and in Denmark to register Palestinians. So there's no political will to reform the PLO. There's no political will to hold elections that represent all Palestinians. Otherwise, we would have seen it. Many Palestinians within the official structure and outside of it have been demanding it for a long time. So before reviving the PLO, we need to reform the PLO. PNC elections, proportional direct elections for every Palestinian community around the world. There needs to be a discussion within that body about the future, about a national program, given the context, the reality, and the paradigm we're in. We are no longer in 1991. We're in 2021. Things have fundamentally changed on the ground, and we need to understand that. We cannot continue with wishful thinking about the previous reality. Now, if we want to come to the elections, which I think Hannes brought up and tie very much into this, you know, the elections were announced with giving us 3 months to organize after 15 years of complete authoritarianism and the lack of space to form an opposition, form political parties, etc. And by the way, through Israeli military orders, you know, the political parties are illegal in Palestine, in the West Bank. If you want to register a political party, you have to do it with the PLO, but the PLO stopped taking applications after Mubadara and Mustafa al-Barghouti. So even then, it's very hard to register a political party with a different ideology. Also, you know, under different military orders, we don't have the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to organize or gather. These are all different issues that also completely shrink the space for us to practice any forms of democracy. So in that context, 3 months were given to have elections. And I don't think we need to rehearse all the different laws that were introduced that marginalize young people, whether it's the age of candidacy, whether it's the fee to register a list, whether it's the new electoral system. that this incentivizes competition locally for young political upstarts and actually rewards entities that have been around for much longer. And the fact that, as Hannes said, we did not start with the PNC, we started with the PLC. Now, I understand PLC members become PNC members, but what message does that send? Are we really keen on voting for a body that essentially now has jurisdiction over maybe 18 to 40% of the West Bank? Or do we want to revive a national liberation movement after an era where a paradigm has failed and we need to come up with a new paradigm given the new reality? To end with this, before opening it up, the current awakening and the current mobilization of young people all over Palestine happened in a decentralized way. Each community responded on its own and was inspired by the other. The young Palestinians in Jerusalem led us. They inspired us. They allowed us to feel a certain motivation that I think all of us lack, not just the younger generation, all of us. And from that, Palestinians in 48 cities of Israel responded, and then the West Bank, and then in Jordan and in Lebanon, they came to the borders, and then you saw hundreds of thousands come out in cities around the world. What this period did was create a great awakening once again about a unity or unified Palestinian identity, which is at the crux of what we're fighting in terms of Israeli fragmentation, which is what the PLO and any political system needs to address. And that energy is there. I don't think it's going to be sustainable unless we have that political system, not to centralize efforts, but to offer every person a space to participate. And so for us, and putting on my Jil al-Tajdid al-Demokrati hat, we're trying to build that unity. We're launching on Monday a national list for youth political representation of young Palestinians from Gaza, from Jerusalem, from the West Bank, and from 48 Palestine. We're running on a progressive platform and vision. And the idea is, one, to raise awareness amongst young Palestinians that it's important not just to face the occupation, but also demand our right for representation and democracy. Two, we're asking people to support this list through its signature. Three, we want to present an exercise in how democracy should be, right, in a society where we don't have those rights. And four, we see this as a building block for young people to engage in these official institutions and their elections, whether it's the municipal council elections, whether it's student council elections, whether it's PLC elections or PNC elections, or pushing for the reform of that. That's what we're trying to do. We don't want to discard what has come before us, but we want to transform what exists now because it's not viable and it's ill-equipped to deal with the challenges that face the Palestinian people. So with that, I end, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Salem, for these insights. If I can summarize very quickly, the PLO was formed around a purpose that Palestinians believed in, and which is the purpose of liberation. The developments that happened throughout the past 40 or 50 years, particularly after the Lebanon war, started alienating the PLO, and for the masses, the PLO started losing its appeal. We are at an important junction regarding the future, I believe, and this is why we are having this session. With this very short summary, I will now open the floor for interventions as well as questions and answers.
If I may, Adnan.
Go ahead, Doctor.
I think Saleh put his finger on the pulse of the society of today. It's a question of the awakening of the national. No voice? مش عم بسمع. Which one? هذا. Can you hear me? You cannot hear me, Adnan. you hear me?
Not clearly, not clearly.
Not clearly, doctor.
Not clearly, they cannot hear me
جرب.
clearly, Adnan.
دكتور
Okay, I
يمكن
have,
تجرب بدون سماعات. دكتور يمكن تجرب بدون سماعات.
okay, we will turn off Dr. Mahdi's computer, and both him and I are going to share the same laptop since we are here anyway. So you can continue now, Dr. Mahdi.
I think Salem put his finger on the right pulse of the society of today in terms of three major things. We have a body recognized by the world as the representative of the Palestinian people of today, in spite of who is there and what they have been doing and what they have been functioning and how much legitimacy they have from their own people. But the body is there. And there have been many attempts to replace the body or to have alternative body or to infiltrate in the body and to change its current establishment. And this is internal Palestinian politics among faction who are in the body and faction who are not in the body. This is facts. The other fact is a question of the youth. As far as I understand, each community has been functioning totally independently and separately from the other, but inspired by the other. Whether it is in Jerusalem, whether it is in the West Bank cities and towns and villages and refugee camps, or in the Arab world. The third thing, which is very important, no body unite all these efforts or these communities. Most of the youth activities, wherever they are, whomever they are, they don't want to have a council or a body or a faction or a party or political party or each is functioning separately and independently concerning the challenges they are facing by the occupiers and by the settlers and by the regime itself. My simple question, is there a way of creating a network without establishing a body, without establishing a council or organization? It's for them yesterday, the past. But this past is a prison for the reality of the politics of today, the recognition. That's why I come to see.
Can't hear anything, Dr. Mahdi. I don't know about the rest, but I can hardly hear you.
We can't hear anything.
I believe the line is cut.
Salem, do you want to maybe go ahead and start answering the question that Dr. Mahdi brought up so far?
Yeah, I can try to piece what I heard together.
Piece it together. Create a network of something that is.
I'll create a network of answers. Look, I think there's coordination amongst the different Palestinian communities and youth. It's not necessarily a political infrastructure that is institutionalized, but there are networks. We all know each other, whether it's in Ramallah, Haifa, Al-Muthallath, Yafa, Naqab, Gaza, etc. We know each other. We communicate with each other. It's just that, and we are inspired by one another. But it's not a centralized form of planning and institutionalization. My sense is, and I think the sense of many others is I think for it to be sustainable, it needs to go beyond that. It needs to be it needs to fit within a political system that's representative of all Palestinians, right? because that's what's missing. The lack of official voices is also a reflection of that. I mean, if you look at the different leadership bodies within Palestine, at the moment, they all contributed to the fragmentation and the localization of each struggle, whether it's the PA in the West Bank, whether it's Hamas in Gaza, whether there's a lack of leadership in any voices of representation within Jerusalem, and whether it's the Joint List or the High Committee in 48. Yani, you know, at the end of the day, when Ayman Aoud and the Joint List run for government, they're running based on issues that meet the needs of the local community, which I understand. But in a sense, there isn't an attempt at reinforcing a common bond and identity with the rest of the Palestinian people as part of one struggle. That to me reinforces fragmentation, not transcends it. And what was different now with young Palestinians is that they transcended it, and that we do speak with one another and we do coordinate, but every activity that you see is done with a sense that we are one people fighting a one struggle that has different elements that oppress us depending on where we are. And so, you know, it will continue to be decentralized until we build something, or we reform something, or we transform something. But I don't think it's sustainable to continually do this, because at the end of the day, these are tactics, not strategy. And we need strategy. We need a vision that brings us together. We need to bring the Palestinians in Chile. We need to bring the Palestinians in the US. We need to bring in the Palestinians in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Germany. And at the moment, you know, this type of work can only go so far. But if we really want to revive the national movement, we need to create buy-in for a national liberation vision again, which we've been missing for the last 30 years.
Hey, hi Salem, this is Jean Boucher here from Op Proteus. So yeah, thank you for this. A quick question for you. So 2 questions, I guess. I've been to probably in the last few months, maybe 15 refugee camps or so, meeting the political leaders there and all that. And I hear a lot of what you say. So 2 questions. Do you feel refugee camp leaders are aligned with the approach you're proposing? And is there any senior PA leaders that you're aware of that are that agree with your approach, or yeah, they're all kind of stuck in their ways and completely disconnected? I do agree with your assessment that they're disconnected, but I'm wondering, are there some that are yeah, aware and agree with your approach?
Look, I don't want to turn into a spokesman for the PA or PA leadership. I don't know who stands where and what. I'm sure not a lot of people are happy with where we are. I think if you're happy with where we are as a national movement, then I seriously question your judgment. In terms of the refugee camps, look, I think there's been a dominance for the factions within the refugee camps. The same type of patronage politics that exists in the West Bank or exists in Gaza or elsewhere has been inherited by the older generation in different places. If you go to Germany, for example, and you talk to Palestinian refugees from Lebanon, which there are a lot, they'll tell you about how within a certain generation, people still see each other as Fatah, Hamas, Jabha, etc. If you talk to the younger generation, there's a complete departure from that form of identity. Similarly, I think in the refugee camps in Lebanon, I've never been, so I can't say, but from a lot of the younger generation of Palestinians that I've talked to in the refugee camps, there are very similar feelings to the one I put forward today. A complete disassociation from the current context we're under.
I may repeat the question again. Is there a tendency to see future leadership among the youth, wherever people will go to refugee camps, to villages and towns and cities and activities and institutions, civil society? The question has been always there. Who represents who speaks on behalf of who? Is there a consensus of somebody represent the message and the messenger? Who is the messenger of today of the youth? Can you clarify if possible?
There isn't one. There isn't one. I think we need to fundamentally move away from this idea of the cult of the individual. We're not waiting for the Palestinian Gandhi. We're not waiting for the Palestinian Martin Luther King. Nobody speaks for us. I think young Palestinians are speaking for themselves by going down to the street, by protesting, by making these demands. I think we need to move away from this thinking completely. I think we need to rebuild and invest in institutions that are representative for all of us. I think if we have PNC elections that are direct and proportional, then the Palestinian community will be responsible for electing its representative, not saying this person speaks for me or doesn't speak for me. You know, we see it in Jerusalem. I think we have now Muna and Muhammad al-Kurd, two people that are fighting for the survival of their home. They're taking on leadership positions because they have to, but they never in the world would Muhammad and Muna come to you and say, I represent the Palestinians of Jerusalem. That's not the way the generation is approaching things. I think fundamentally we need to invest in a system and a system of political representation, not in individual leaders in different parts of different communities.
So basically, I see ourselves standing before two options. The first one is the existing PLO, a legitimate, in many ways, representative of the Palestinian people, with all its shortcomings, in particular the loss of vision or the loss of unification of the Palestinian cause, and the other side is the age of the members of that leadership and their disconnect from the Palestinian youth. On the other side, I see the youth who want to be active, but they don't know how to be active. First of all, they say that we are not politically affiliated. And secondly, there is nobody unifying them. And thirdly, and most importantly, there is no clear path for those youth who represent the future to become part of the decision-making circle within Palestine. How do we reconcile these things?
Elections, like anywhere else in the world. I mean, to politically participate, you need the space to politically participate, right? At the end of the day, we want to participate within the political system. We need the space, we need the institutions to participate in. Otherwise, there's a complete lack of opportunity. But again, it's not just the opportunity, there's also barriers to entry that we talked a bit about before. So after 15 years to call elections, there are two, I think there are what, 3-point-something million potential voters for the PLC. And how many of that proportion of voters was young people, right? And then you had the age of candidacy be 28, even though the average age in Palestine is 21. And that candidacy age was amongst the highest in the world. The only two places that are higher than Palestine are Kuwait and Jordan. So even then there was a barrier to entry. The idea of resignations to be able to run in elections was another big issue. The third, the idea of paying $20,000 to register a list. I understand there are registration fees around the world, but we live in an economy and in a society where youth unemployment is skyrocketing. Where are young people in Gaza going to a list that represents 16 people running for the PLC from Gaza? Where are they going to bring $20,000 from? So not only isn't there the space, but there are also barriers to entry. And this is the issue. You know, when young people go protest in Ramallah today, I don't know if you saw the pictures, but people protesting in Ramallah, the killing of Nizar Banat were beaten today. So it's not like we live in an environment that is conducive for youth participation within politics. Quite the opposite. If there was a genuine also a desire to see more people participate politically, this to me was, I think, the most misunderstood part of the change that happened to the law in January when it was introduced. The change to the electoral system. The electoral system was very similar to the British style, where you had mixed voting, where you vote on local constituency and national representation lists. This allowed Hamas to compete and win, but it also allowed people to run locally within their own community where they're known. And that's where young people are known. And if you don't have, and they changed it to one that looks like Israel, which is a national proportional list. And if you do not have a national base where you can compete from the north to the south, you're not going to enter the PLC. Okay, if you're a young person that is just coming to political age today, and you don't have that national base, you're not going to be able to compete. So basically, you're excluding everyone who hasn't had the chance to politically organize for the last 15 years. That system We saw it in our eyes as جيل التجديد الديمقراطي. People were hungry for elections. By the time registration deadline came, all the young people withdrew. They said, this is cooked between the two major parties. Why have elections? Why participate? And even though there was high demand and high number of lists, I still was not sure about the voter turnout amongst young people in those elections. I think that's something we're not talking about. When we had municipal elections a few years ago, we had the lowest voter turnout, I think, in history of Palestinian municipal elections, because people do not believe in them. Because people believe that there's a monopoly of power in different places that are excluding people from participating.
Hannes,
Yes.
go to Hannes.
I want to pose a question that I think a lot of maybe also the international listeners are asking themselves, not only now, but since quite some time. If the PA doesn't have any democratic legitimacy anymore, and Banat was one of the voices who said, okay, stop any financial support for the PA. As long as there is no democratic legitimacy. And you have very well described how most of the power moved from the PLO to the PA effectively. On the other hand, obviously the international community is still stuck with the idea of the PA being the nucleus of a potential Palestinian state. So I see in many conversations I have with the international community that they don't really know what to do, how to move forward or to move backward or to move sideways. Salem, do you have a recipe for them?
I'm not a chef with a recipe, but I think the problem with the problem is, Hannes, is that the EU and the international community is stuck in 1991. I think they realize there's a reality on the ground that's fundamentally different, but still are pushing a paradigm that no longer corresponds to that reality. And that's the problem. Even beyond talking about how do you leverage your financial aid or your political decisions, etc. The EU especially needs to have an internal conversation about what are we willing to support and not support, right? I think, continuously talking about this idea of a two-state solution, completely blind to what's going on, is contributing to the problem, is not helping to solve it. I think the fundamental starting point for the EU is, do we support Palestinian self-determination or not, and building from there. But at the moment, you have the former leader of the Israeli settler movement as the Prime Minister of Israel. The settler movement in Israel is now the kingmaker of Israeli politics. To make the two-state solution feasible, right, under the idea of land swaps, you need to at least move anywhere from 200, 300 to 400,000 settlers across the Green Line. What future Israeli government and what society that 65% of adult Jewish Israelis vote for right-wing extremist parties is that going to happen? Genuinely, So I think that's where the conversation starts. Are we willing to recognize the reality on the ground for what it is, apartheid? Two, are we willing to develop policies that actually address that system or not? But continually to address, trying to rearrange the deck chairs of a sinking Titanic, thinking it's going to lead to any type of policy solutions, I think is fundamentally flawed. And then we come to the issue of, okay, then how do we deal with the Palestinian side? Do we want to make it an environment more conducive or less conducive for democracy? I think that's the question. And there you have your answer.
Salem, I don't agree that I have an answer, because it's not as easy as that, right? I mean, just imagine the alternative. There's no more financing for the PA. Will this lead to more democracy or will it lead to anarchy? Will it, the PA, it's also the biggest employer in the country. It has nonetheless introduced some form of institutions, some form of statehood, some form of regulating the day-to-day life that you cannot that easily give up. You know, I mean, it's very easy to criticize the PA, but when you do, you would have to come up with an alternative. To it.
But Hannes, I just want to clarify, that was not what I said. That was not my position. I'm not saying cut financing to the PA and let it self-destruct, or that's not at all what I'm saying. I think let's revisit why these elections came in the first place in January. The reason why the elections were announced was because because the PA were courting the Biden administration. They wanted to present their best foot forward on that they have the legitimacy to be able potentially to negotiate with the Israelis for a two-state solution. That's their theory of change. Based on that, they took different decisions and announced elections. So that tells us that the PA considers the reaction of the international community to its decisions. My question is, how do you do that in an environment that allows more democracy within Palestine? And the starting point not being the PA, but also being the PNC, right? When President Abbas goes to meet with Chancellor Merkel, met with her, she did not push him on PNC elections. She pushed him on PLC elections. And I think those messages that are heard from the international community matter, because as we saw, they are taken into consideration in the calculations of decisions. So that's the point I'm making. Just to clarify.
Or democracy. You know more than anybody else the current situation. We have system. And then we have the international community attending and participating and funding the PA and trying to reconstitute something in Gaza, rehabilitation and reconstruction and some salaries and healing the wounds in a way or another. Thirdly, we have the representative, what we call them, diplomatic mission in the occupied territories, who today, some of them like the Canadian and the European Union came with a clear statement condemning the killing of the innocent Zinat voice and silence him forever. And then you have the security forces from the American to the Canadian to the British to the European supporting and enhancing and developing the PA security establishment in coordination with Israel. And by this, Palestinians are left alone, facing all these components and challenges. Along this line, a window of hope has been opened, recognizing 60% of our society are the youth, who came with this national awakening of their national pride and succeeded in unifying the Palestinians wherever they are, whomever they are, from Jerusalem to Gaza, to Nazareth, to Amman, and to the diaspora. And the message has been there. We need a new Palestinian strategy to face the challenges, whether they are occupation, whether they are short of democracy, whether they are absence of representative and leadership. Where is the international community message today to the youth who are stuck in between all these odds and challenges? Election can deliver always representatives and not leaders. There are different venues to deliver leadership in any society. Take the question of what happened in Egypt 2011. What happened to the youth who brought down the Mubarak regime after 30 years? Either in the prison or in the graves or in the diaspora, and later on were hijacked by the Islamicists and later on by the military regime. Are we following these steps to see the youth in these three areas in graves or diaspora or the prison, realizing there will never be anarchy along the line of occupation and apartheid system, and there will be always short of democracy under occupation. Salem, where we go.
Doctor, I think I missed the essential part of your question at the end because it cut out, just the end of it.
Dr. Mahdi said that where do we go from here, given all these landscape that he described?
Any window of hope?
Absolutely a window of hope. I think Palestinians, young Palestinians rising up all around the world together under one sense of unity is all the hope we need. I think at the moment, as Palestinians, we need to look inwards. We need to look internally. We need to rebuild a political system and a Palestinian house that can bring us all together. And we need to invest in that. And we need to move beyond just the decentralized form of activism that's taking place on the ground and see how we can make it an institutionalized system that represents every Palestinian and gives everyone a voice to come up with a collective strategy. Look, one person cannot make a decision about the fate of the PA. The PNC and the executive committee of the PLO should make the decision about the PA. They're it's a sub-entity. We never ask a holding company, right, to be run by its subsidiary. That never works. So I think we need to get back to reinvesting in that holding company. And I think that's where we need to focus and define for ourselves, what is our national vision? What do we want? And seriously, what do we want? We're under a new paradigm. What do we want as a people and how do we get there? And what is the vehicle that will take us there? Those are the things we need to be investing in. And that's where your source of legitimacy comes. Your source of legitimacy should never come from whether you're invited to Washington, D.C. or not. That's not where you get your legitimacy from. That's not who you pander to. You invest in your people, and we need to do that again. And we haven't done that for a very long time. So that for me is the way forward. Now, I am biased because I'm a member of Jil al-Tajdid al-Demokrati, and we have a very specific theory of change. We see that young Palestinians, need to participate politically. They need to engage in all different forms of elective representative bodies, whether it's the unions, the lawyer unions, the farmer unions, etc., the student bodies, the municipalities, even representative entities within Israel. We need to reclaim those in an effort to transform the entire system, right? That's our theory of change. That's what I believe in. That's why I'm a member of the group, in the hope that one day we can create that space that brings us all together. Again, because our power is on our people, not anything else, not a capital across the world, not a financer somewhere else.
If you are insisting that elections are our option, our way forward in order to create a new type of representation, then and I think that to a certain extent, your position is shared by a majority of the Palestinian people. But on the other side, we haven't seen that stark reaction towards the president's decision to call off or to postpone indefinitely the Palestinian elections. This is one issue. The other issue is that I see you working under the parameters of the Oslo Accord of the Palestinian National Authority. The institutions of the Palestinian National Authority represented by the Palestinian Legislative Council, the institutions established under Oslo, which is the Palestinian Legislative Council. So first of all, why this silence towards the cancellation or postponement of the elections if we insist that this is the best way forward? And secondly, do you think that even if you manage to get some kind of representation under the present parameters, that you will be able to rise to the level of effecting change?
Thank you. Those are really good questions. We do not operate under the Oslo paradigm. We running for municipality elections. The municipalities are probably the most important body in Palestine for political representation and have come way before Oslo. Some of our leading members of the national movement and our leadership were mayors in the 60s and 70s. So I don't believe we are sticking by any means to the Oslo paradigm. The second thing is جيل التجديد الديمقراطي, the youth representative list is running candidates from 48 as well. And we're actually trying to transcend the green line, not reinforce it. And in the next stage, we're going to add representatives from the refugee camps and the diaspora to address this point. But we need to also understand the reality of these structures. These structures exist, we cannot ignore them. They have monopolies of power. To be able to challenge for the entire system, you need to also challenge in them. Now, I'm not with any elections. We at Jil al-Tajdid were not running a list in the PLC elections because we felt that they were not legitimate and not democratic. So it's not any elections, and it's not just PNC, a renewal of the PNC under a quota system, right? Or just the renewal of the PNC from members within the PLC members that make it to the PNC. No, you need fundamental structural reform to the PNC and then hold elections for it to be legitimate and democratic. That's the position, just to clarify. And the last thing, and I think it's very important to talk about this. Look, I think young people all over the world, even in Germany, in the US, are not usually very politically engaged. There's very low turnout numbers for young people usually, especially over the last few elections. Maybe Trump changed that a bit, but compared to the older generations or relative to the older generations, there's a complete departure or distrust from the establishment and what it represents. This also is the case in Palestine, living under, I think, a hierarchy of oppression, whether it's Israel, whether it's the PA, Hamas, etc., and a growing authoritarian environment. And three, the barriers to entry we talked about and the lack of space for us to participate politically. So naturally, everybody's withdrawing from that process. So actually, the excitement was there in the beginning, but then when those barriers to entry became very clear, people withdrew. And so the idea of the cancellation of the election, of an election people didn't believe in anymore, wasn't going to bring people to the ground.
A simple question, a very simple question. Taking into consideration the shocking news of this morning and the death of Zainat, and the demonstration in Ramallah and the statement by the Canadian and European Union, a condemnation of what happened, no lack of freedom of speech, condemning all this action, and we don't know where we're heading afterwards. Is there a way or somewhere that a voice can be raised with the international community, either with the security functioning Palestine, the US and the Canadian, or the international community by itself, to ask for punishment and for justice and to put in jail those atrocities, those who killed Zainat, why they killed him and what happened? Or are we going back again to the same question, a committee of investigation, and by tomorrow people will forget the story and we will have another scandal, another case, and by this we'll carry on as usual? How can I reach this international community with a clear message, either to face the challenges of what happened in the PA security establishment of today, or just carry on business as usual? Can I hear a voice from the Canadian, from European participant in this meeting, the Finnish, the French? Can I hear some reaction?
Dr. Mahdi, I guess you're probably
yes, my friend, you are the right person. Go ahead.
putting me on the spot as always. I have to say right now, as you saw, like obviously our Canadian representative has been very vocal on that, and we're having the discussions. I know the coordinator has put pressure directly on the Prime Minister following this, and there's a lot of internal discussion even on the British side about how to react to this. So again, right now you're hearing the rhetoric. The discussion is on this, if this will turn into action, but obviously there needs to be the discussion is there needs to be consequences for these kinds of actions.
Yeah, in order to maintain this friendship and consultation and trust and respect for your presence and your work, if we can see some consequences happening to the PA security establishment on this particular case, we can build upon it some hope to give the youth another message they can carry on their struggle for national pride and ending occupation in different ways and means.
Yeah, no, I guess I'm agreeing with you. This just happened now, so I would say again, this is the discussions we're having at this time about what actions to take with them directly. I don't really have, I think, a precise answer right now, Dr. Mahdi.
Okay, I think somebody else wanted to speak with Dr. Mahdi. Yes.
Yes, Dr. Mahdi, this is Lydia Tabtat from the French Consulate in Jerusalem. Basically, it's the same as our Canadian colleagues. So we supported the EU reaction this morning, and we are also preparing a national reaction to what happened this morning, yesterday. And of course, you also need to know that as EU, we made several démarches on the case of Nizar Banat in the past, previously, with the PEA. Obviously, this didn't help, but we raised the case, a specific case of Mr. Banat in the past several times. So we keep passing messages, if I may say so, but obviously they're not going through. And to be very honest with you, we are also thinking of how to make them pass through now. I also had a question, if I may, regarding municipalities. I wanted to hear from you about your reading of the recent, how do you call it, dissolution of municipal councils that was taken by the government. I know that local elections were planned before the end of this year. Is this a good sign or not? I know that this decision to dissolve the municipal councils is quite surprising. Some say alarming. I would like to hear from you about that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all very unsure about the constant changes that are being made to different representative and electoral bodies. We were hoping that the elections for the municipality would happen in November as originally planned, but no word on that. I don't know if you're also seeing, but one of the biggest unions we have in the country is the lawyers' union, and it's one of the most democratic institutions we have, even though there's been dominance of one party over another. The elections for that also got postponed. So there's no clarity on what's going on, how these decisions are made, and to what end. Similarly to the way the issue of Jerusalem was dealt with and the elections for the PLC. Yes, we agreed that these elections are not democratic, but they came about in a very untransparent way without any public debate, and they were also taken off the table without any transparency or public debate. If anything, I think elections should have been held in Jerusalem, and people should have gone and voted and challenged the Israeli occupation. I think that's what the elections should have been used for, and not as a retreat and withdrawal. So on multiple levels, whether it's on the union level or different institutional levels, whether it's on the municipal level, whether it's on the legislative level, whether it's on the national council level, it's a complete departure from any form of democracy.
Thank you very much, Salem. I think that as a think tank, what is in our hand is to raise the various questions, the various options that we have towards the future, with regards to the future of the PLO, what options there are, the dilemmas that are involved with going ahead with each of those options on one side, and the other side is how people feel about the PLO and its future, how the younger generation feels about their chances of having any kind of say in their future. This is what is frustrating to most Palestinian youth. Fortunately, nonetheless, there are people and groups like Jil Tajdid Demokrati, people who are trying to find a way within the cracks of this stagnant political institution or political system in order for them to move and shake some things related to their representation and the future of making policy and decisions within Palestine. I think that this is what is important. It is what we are aspiring for, both as older Palestinians and younger Palestinians, to see how a majority of Palestinians have a say in their political future, whether with regards to the agenda or with regards to the implementation of that agenda. To that extent, many questions have been raised and addressed. Of course, we are not in position to make any decisions or recommendations for the future, but at least for our colleagues and counterparts in this meeting, mainly the international community, as well as many Palestinian intellectuals and decision makers, we have addressed those questions, those dilemmas, and for this we thank you again, Salem. We also, as usual, thank FES for their support for these types of discussions that are aimed at generating questions, trying to consider policy options for change within the Palestinian society towards the future. I think that with this, we come to an end of this meeting, unless anybody else has any question or anything to add.
I do, please.
Go ahead, Mahmoud.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Mahmoud Khwais. I'm from Jerusalem. Yeah, Mahmoud Khwais. I'm just wondering, why do we always insist on reforming the PLO and their institutions? Why can't we find alternative and live without having a PLO and have a regular government and regular parliament working towards the good of the people? Thank you.
I think that this question was raised diplomatically and implicitly, Mahmoud, and I think that it was also answered diplomatically and implicitly. But if you want, since Salem is our main speaker, if you want to add something, please do. Because this is the option. I kept asking and pushing, why do you think that elections are the best way forward, the structure under the elections? But of course, there is the other option, the coup. They changing or building an alternative, a parallel competing system. But I don't think that we have reached this point yet, but nonetheless, I will leave it to Salem to answer.
If I understand the question correctly, why are we not investing in a government? Is that what it is? Why do we need the PLO?
The question is basically, why do you need the PLO? Not only a government, but like a different body representing the Palestinians.
Haven't we tried to build a government for the last 30 years under apartheid and occupation, and how well has that turned out? And I think we also need to be very conscious of that. At the end of the day, we attempted to build a state under extreme circumstances, while fundamentally forgetting that we are a national liberation movement, fighting for freedom and rights for every Palestinian around the world, not a small segment of them that lives in the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza. There are 13 million Palestinians around the world. They have their rights as well, and that needs to be addressed. So for me, it's not about whether it's the PLO or a government. It's about a political system that represents everyone and speaks on behalf of everyone. Everyone has a different theory of change of how to get there. But the idea that we really need to invest in a government or a parliament when we have tried that with complete failure is not building on empirically what we went through for the last 30 years. We're closing down that chapter in our history, and we need to start looking forward, right? What brought the most amount of Palestinians to the street? It was the sense of unity, of identity that transcended this fragmentation. And I think that's where we need to be investing, not always center the West Bank as if it's the center of Palestinian politics. It's not, it shouldn't be. And that's a very important thing. It's about a Palestinian political system that's representative for all. So that's what I'm advocating for. One way is to reform the PLO, one way is to build an alternative. It depends on your theory of change, but it's not about investing in a government that provides services. That's not where we are anymore.
Thank you.
I don't think it was. Go ahead. I don't think it was an innocent question. The position today, whether I like it or not, we have embodiment of our national pride and national consensus, national movement in the PLO. There is a need for a political will to revise and reform the PLO as our sole legitimate representative. History told us for the past several decades, all attempts inside and outside and from within to look for alternative PLO, substitute PLO, alternative leadership, substitute leadership failed completely because the consensus among the Palestinians, wherever you go, whomever you are, is the PLO our sole legitimate representative in spite of all the mistakes and the problem from within in terms of infrastructure, establishment, representation, and activities. And we have to work all together for a political will to reform the PLO and to reconstitute the PLO as a Palestinian National Liberation Movement. And this is my point and my position of today.
Appreciated. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, for sharing with us your thoughts, as well as for listening. And we hope to see you again and to meet you again virtually or in person for other roundtable meetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And if I might say something really quickly.
Yes, please. Yes, go ahead, Salem. Go ahead, please.
Let us not take the killing of Nizar Banat in vain. We need accountability. We need fundamental change. And everyone on this call, whether they're Palestinian or otherwise, has a role to play and a responsibility. So I hope we take this to a point to take action, and accountability is what is needed at this point. Thank you.
Thank you.